welcome back to another video here on Free Will Photos. Today we are going to recreate or create the Pep Ventosa effect on an image. Now, if you're not familiar with Pep Ventosa, that's okay, because I literally just got familiar with his work in the past 3 days, just looking through it and understanding how he makes his work. This is the Pep Ventosa website. So you can go ahead and go to pepventosa.com if you really want to take a look at these photos. But what you can see here is it's a very impressionistic look, and it's actually very easy to achieve inside of any editing application that allows you to stack, blend, or stack exposures essentially. So that's what we're going to do today. All right, so here we are inside of ON1 Photo Raw. I am using the Max version, but the regular version of ON1 works perfectly fine for this. What you can see here is I just converted the RAW files, which are NEF files, shot on a Nikon D750, and I converted those over to a JPEG. You can do this with iPhone images. It doesn't really matter. Now, once you have all your photos selected, you could come over here to the right bumper and click layers. And if you're not seeing that, you can click on window and then show right bumper. And that will open up this right bumper panel over here. And then you can do that. You can also right click. Now, know that your computer, it may cause your computer to go sluggish for a very long time. So if you just want to get this done in a more quick kind of way, then what I recommend you do, I'm just going to go ahead and deselect all these images. Find your base layer, and the base layer is the photo that you want to have represented as your overall image. For me, I think that number 11 is the base layer that I want to have represented as like my overall image. And that's because I like the placement of the bench over here to the left, and the tree, which is kind of the main subject here, is in full view of the image. Now, what I will also note is you want to make sure that whenever you photograph your images, that you leave space on the left and the right side, as well as the top and the bottom around the subject matter, because you'll see later on down the line, we're going to have to crop in. And if you shoot the image very, very tight, it's not going to come out the way that you would expect it to. So you want to leave space all the way around here. Now, more notes on capturing the image. What you want to do, or what you can do, this is purely subjective and it's artistic, right? Is you're going to go around the subject. So in this case, it was a tree. And what Guillotine did is he walked around the tree all the way around. And you can kind of tell where he is in relationship. If this is my base photo with the bench in front to the left, and then if I were to go back one image, he went over to his left a little bit, because now you can see the relationship of where the bench is with the tree. And then he went over a little bit more to the left. You can see how that kind of worked out. And I don't know exactly which direction he started moving in, and it's really not as important, but he went all the way around. Now, when you do this, I recommend that you have a level. If you're using a mirrorless camera, use the level tool or meter inside of the camera, so that way you can keep your horizon line pretty straight, because you will have to adjust that later down the line. Otherwise, you're going to have like this weird ghosting effect, and it just looks a little odd. So I'll show you how to clean that up as well. And if not, I'll show you a different way if time permits to really clean this up. So those are some of the notes that I needed to share up front as far as capturing the image. Now let's get into editing the image. So what I'm going to do is double click on this image right here, which I want to use as my base layer. And I need to remember number 11 is my base layer. So now I have my image pretty much in here, and I'm just going to close my properties because I'm not going to need it for a little while. I will need it a little bit later, but not right now. So now that I have my image actually ready to go, what I'm going to do is click on layers, and this opens up my layer pane. Now I'm going to rename this to base, or I'm going to put it 11 dash base. And this just lets me know which one was the base layer when I pulled it from the JPEG group. Now what I'm going to do is hit the plus icon, and I'm going to hit add layer. Now, I recommend doing it this way because it helps your computer kind of digest the information. And at this point, it doesn't matter what order you bring them in. Just know that or just remember, I use number 11 as my base layer, so I don't need to bring that one in. So what I'm going to do is actually start after number 11, and I'm just going to grab number 12 and number 13 over here, and then I'll start over from the beginning. So that way I kind of know which ones I have. The number or where they are doesn't matter a whole lot. And so I'm just going to go through here, hit plus, and I'll fast forward through this because it's not a very exciting thing. All I'm doing is loading different layers into ON1 into a layer stack. And this is going to render into a .on photo file. So make sure that you have enough hard drive space, which, they're relatively small, but it is going to have a lot of images in there. Each of these JPEGs that I'm adding are approximately 5 megabytes. So just know that, you could have anywhere from 10 to 150, depending on how many images you want to use. I'm only using 14 here, and that seems to work quite well. But the more images you use, the more you're going to have inside of there. So now I have all of my images into the layer stack over here. You can see I have all 14 images lined up in here. Now what we want to do is hit save settings. So I'm going to come up to the top, I'm going to click on settings, and then we're just going to hit save settings. What this does is it creates that on photo file for us. So if the computer decides to crash, we don't lose all of our information. I do highly recommend that you do this step because you don't want to lose information. That would be bad. So do this step. It takes a little bit of time, but it's better to take the time now than to lose your work that you've been doing. And this is even more important if you have more than 14 images. Like, let's say you had 30 images that you were working on or more, you definitely want to save. Now, I don't recommend doing more than I don't recommend doing more than 20. I think you can get a really good effect with 20. If you want to do more than that, I think you are looking at a program away from ON1. So Affinity Photo, Photoshop, and maybe even GIMP, or Pixlr, I think is what it's called. It's on the web, but definitely something that is designed for heavy layer editing. Because let's remember, ON1 is not designed for heavy layer editing. It just has a layer feature built into it, and that's what we're exploiting right now. Okay, so now that that's saved, all my images are in here. I am going to go ahead and turn off each one of these images, these image layers, by hitting the little radial button next to each photo. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to build up this effect. Now, remember I said that it doesn't matter what order you load these in, and I do actually mean that, all right? However, what you want to do is make sure that you have a good understanding of what elements you want to keep in the image and what elements you don't. Now, I like this bench, and I want this bench that is in the base layer to be the only bench that I see in the entire image. The way that I'm going to do that is every time that I click on a particular layer, I'm going to turn that layer on, and then I'm going to click on the layer mask, and this is going to bring up my properties menu. I'm going to click on masking, and I'm going to mask that bench away. And what ends up happening is the bench that I want is going to show through. So I'm going to just go ahead and click on masking, and with a paint out or an erase, I'm just going to simply erase that. Now, it's okay that that doesn't really match anything that's going on. Uh, and because what I'm going to do is lower my opacity down to about 75%. I think that that's a good percentage. And then I'm going to paint away where the bench is in this photo anyhow. Okay. So now that's the bench on the base layer. And we're going to do this on every single layer to make sure that I keep that bench. Now, what I need to do is grab my move tool and line up the tree trunk from the layer that I'm working on, which is the layer that you can see me moving around here. I need to line that tree trunk and the horizon line, and this is where that horizon line really comes into play here. I need to line that up with the tree on the base layer. So if I come down to about there, this seems to be where I need it. So I'm going to be good there. And now I need to come back to my masking. So I'm just going to click on the mask again so I can get my brush and paint away this area a little bit more right there. Okay. Because all I really care about is the tree and making sure that I don't have that other bench show up. So now I can change my blend mode. And early on, I recommend using one of the darkening blend modes like multiply or color burn, linear burn, whichever one works well for the lighting in your image. The reason is you want the tree to stay pretty well pronounced. Because later on we're going to go into lighten and screen. So I'm going to use multiply on this one, and you can come back and change those later. So, it's not a huge deal. Now we're going to turn on the next layer, and I'm going to click on the mask. And again, I'm going to go find that bench, and I'm going to paint that away. And yes, ON1 has to analyze each layer. It is one of the annoyances of working in ON1 for this, but it is what it is. So now on the second layer, the first one, I put this at 75%. I go 5% less, and then I come back and refine it later. So this one is going to be down to 70%. Okay. So now that it's down to 70%, I can see where that bench is. But before I paint away this mask, what I'm going to do is come over to the move tool, and I am going to align this tree on this layer with the tree underneath it. And looks like about there seems to work well. And this one, I may use maybe screen. Yeah, I think screen will work. Because what you want to do is really build out this tree. And that's why I think screen works well for this particular one. And now it's time for me to make sure that I keep this bench shining through. So I'm going to grab my brush by clicking on the mask here. I'm just going to paint this away. And you can see how this starts to really bring back that information. And we'll clean up this bottom portion here a little bit later. Uh, and this is something that you're going to have to take your time with as well, but all is well. So next layer is this one here. We're going to go ahead and click on it. I'm going to lower this opacity down to about 65-ish because the last one was 70. So we'll lower this opacity down to about 65. And I think that that's good. I'm not going to worry about masking anything in this particular one, just so I can keep the flow of things moving. And I'm actually going to lower the opacity a little bit more here, so that way I can really see that underlying layer. So I'll do that. And you can see that this one, it is really, really, the tree was leaning. And in order for me to align this layer, I have to really pull this down. And you just want to get it to about where you think it should be. All right. So I think that this is going to do well. And I'm okay with a little bit of curvature going on there. So now what I'm going to do is bring this opacity back up to maybe we'll go 55 on this one. Yeah, maybe we'll go 55. And then we'll turn on the next layer. I'm going to leave that one on normal for now. And we'll bring this one down. We'll bring this one down to probably somewhere around 40. Yeah, I think that works. All right. Still got the move tool activated. I'm on this particular layer. I can move this around, and I'm going to put this right over that tree, and we'll do it like so. So now I have that right over there, and we'll try a blend mode like screen maybe again. And this is just helping with brightening up everything. All right. The more you do this, the more familiar you'll get with the idea of which blend mode you should use, and explore or experiment. The only thing that I recommend you do is early on is use a blend mode that darkens things. What were we on this one? 43. So let's move this one down to about 30, 37. Yeah, 37%. And let's see what lighten does. No, I don't like what it's doing in the at the top of the tree, but I'll go with it. Lighten could work. So I'm going to move this around, and you could barely see it. That's why I don't really care for lighten. So let's go with screen. Because screen, that seems to work quite well. And I'll just align the tree again as best I can. And I feel like this one should be a little bit more dense. And so I'll bring it up to 44. And that's okay if it is a little bit more dense than the other images or the underlying image. It's all about the look. All right. We're going for the look more than we're going for anything else in this particular image. So we'll go ahead and click on the next image, lower the opacity, and this is really just a rinse and repeat when it comes down to it. Maybe we'll go with one of the darker ones just to give the tree a little bit more structure. And let's find that alignment, which is about right here. So that's pretty good. And then we'll come to the next one. And then this one should probably be a screen overlay. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this to screen. And one of the reasons why I don't recommend using ON1 for this particular process is because you end up having to wait for ON1 to analyze each one of these layers. And to me, that just seems ridiculous when you could use other software that doesn't require ON1 to or require any sort of rendering. So that is up to you, but I am showing you it can be done inside of ON1 if this is the only editing software that you have. But I definitely recommend Photoshop or Affinity Photo for something like this. I'm just going to bring this one down to about 64. And then we're going to come to the next one here. And we'll let it analyze. And I'm going to pull down on the opacity here again. This one I may not actually use a blend mode for. And this is all subjective and what you would have to do with your own images. But what I'm trying to do is make that tree trunk a little bit wider. So I may actually pull up on the opacity here. And I think that that could work out quite well. I like how we're developing these ghosting trees over here on the left-hand side. And I like how it's starting to clean up this bottom. That's the reason why I'm not using a blend mode. All right, because we still have 5 more images up here. And I think that with these 5 images, we'll really be able to make things happen. Now, in this image, you can see that the tree is kind of leaning to the right. So we're going to have to rotate this when we start to move it. So this one is a prime example of probably using screen, and then I will bring down the opacity so that way it's not as strong in the overall image. And then what we'll do is we'll come out here, rotate this. Let me pull the tree off center so I can see which one we're moving. You could barely see it there in the grass, but I can see it on my monitor. And I'm just going to move this up until I think it's where it ought to be. And this one, because it is leaning, I'm going to probably go a little bit higher, and that's going to help us get a little bit of depth on this tree, or height on the tree, I should say. And I'll just bring up the opacity a little bit. So if I turn this layer off and on, you can tell it lightens up everything, but it actually helps with extending the tree out in this direction. But it also messes up the shape a little bit. So maybe I will pull this over just a touch here. Yeah, because I don't want to mess up the shape. Yeah, there we go. So something like that. All right, now we'll go to the next one. This one, I feel like it should be a multiply. It's likely not going to be a multiply, but I feel like it should be just because this is a darker image to begin with. So I may not need to use the multiply blend mode. So let's just pull down on the opacity and see how well it blends with the rest of the image. Yeah, I think it does need a blend mode, and I'll go with multiply because I can always lighten the image using other techniques later down the line. So I'm not afraid of making the image dark while I'm building my layer stacks here. Let me just bring up the opacity so I can see. All right, let me get rid of the blend mode for a second, making it hard to see where the tree is. There it is. All right, so let's move it up And now it is aligned. I actually like that look, but I feel like I do need to use like a darkening blend mode and stylistic choice here. All right. So now we'll probably use these ones on a screen blend mode or a lighten blend mode. And these will be so minor of opacity that they're just adding in a little bit of character to the overall image. And before I do anything, I need to align it. And it's too opaque. So let's pull that down. Okay. And so there is the base tree right here. Right about here. Okay. And then I'm going to pull down this blend mode, or I'm sorry, this layer to about 20 and go with a lighter blend mode. And I feel like screen may work out well. Uh, and maybe I need to bring that down a little bit further. Looks a little too blurry for me. So let's just pull this down. I think that that'll work out quite well. Okay. So now we'll click on the next image. And again, this one is going to be moved to screen as well. And the opacity is going to be extremely low here. And the goal is really just to help brighten up the image again, but at the same time, add a little bit more of that impressionistic look to the overall image. So there's that. And then we'll go with lighten this time. And we should be able to find that quite well right around here. And I like that. So we'll go with it. And then we'll open up the last image. And again, this one will be at such a low opacity, we may not even really be able to see it other than being able to fill where that particular image sits in the overall look, if you will. So before I change the blend mode, I'm just going to pull down the opacity to about 23. I think that'll be enough for us to be able to see where it's at. And then we're just going to line this up with this area right here. I think that is where we want it to be. And let's go with lighten. And then I'm just going to pull this opacity down. Again, this one is not really meant to be seen. It's just more of a, like, it's filling in some of these areas up here just to add to it overall. So now what we're going to do is right click on this top one and hit new stamped layer. All right. I know that we have all this ghosting going on down here. I have a way of correcting that, which is a little bit easier than the other method that I was going to use. Okay, so that took a lot longer than expected. So I just went ahead and fast forwarded into the stamped layer being created, which is this one right here on the very top of our stack. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and turn off all of these other layers so you can see that I do actually have a stamped layer. And so there is our final image, right? If I turn this off, then we get the transparency markers. Here is our layer with essentially it's a snapshot of all of these layers merged into one. So I'm just going to call this stamped. And this is a very important way of working. Now, what I said earlier is we want to kind of clean up this bottom section here. And one of the ways that you can do that, I'm just going to move this base layer all the way up to just underneath. There we go. And then I'm going to turn on that particular layer. On our stamped layer, I'm just going to grab our masking bug and I'm going to do a linear top or bottom, I should say. So we'll rotate that around and you can see it gets rid of all that ghosting and it helps with the overall masking. Now, the challenge that we're going to have here is really just getting that tree just right. And I'm not going to do the greatest job for tutorial time's sake, but just know that you will want to take your time when you do this for yourself because there is that photo with the bench that I probably should have masked earlier. So do something maybe like that. And then what you can do with the base image now that you've created your layer stack is you can come into effects and grab a lens blur. And this gives essentially the same look that you're getting underneath here. And you can just pull down that opacity until it blends with what the overall image looks like. And that's a way of cleaning up that ghosting down there. And then, of course, if you're still seeing it, what you can do is come back to the stamped layer and you can grab a brush and with a low opacity. I don't recommend doing this with a high opacity. So 60 might be too high still. I can just kind of paint over this because you want it to blend well. All right. That is the goal. Make it blend well. And this image, it just lends itself quite well to doing something like this, where I can kind of just paint away this horizon line and things work out pretty decent. Now, I'm noticing the underlying image, the one that we just applied the lens blur to, it is darker than the rest of the image. And so what we need to do is make it a little bit brighter. So I'm going to come to the base image here and I'm going to, you could do this in a number of ways, right? We can do it very simply by coming into develop, tone and color, and you could probably increase exposure until that bottom portion matches a little better where we were painting in that horizon line. So let's come back to our stamp layer and come back to our horizon line and just kind of blend this in like so, maybe something like that. And then we can come back to our actual base layer and play around with the exposure. If you go too bright, it won't look like it makes sense. So just, play around with it, make it make sense for your image. Maybe pull down on the blacks. That'll help with that contrast and the separation. Or actually, you could pull up on the blacks now that I think about it. And we'll pull the exposure back down. And we'll just pull up on the blacks. And what that should help with is making it more of that screen look. And then we can also open up the midtones. So that may be a better method. And then we could just pull down on the shadows if we want to get some of that contrast in there. So now that we have those two blended decently well, now you want to create, and we'll just relabel this to stamped one. And then we're going to right click on this top layer again. We're going to create a new stamped layer. Now you could do merge visible and that will merge those two, but I like to have the ability to go back to my work. So I'm just going to click on new stamped layer one more time and let that run through. Hopefully it'll go a lot faster than the last one since it's only merging two images this time around, as opposed to 15 or 14 images. Okay, so we will label this stamped 2. So that way we know what we got here. And if I turn off these bottom ones, you can see that I have a stamped layer here. So now what it really comes into is that cropping. So I'm going to hit the letter C on my keyboard to pull up the crop tool. And if you want to keep the original ratio, you can, if that makes sense, which in this image it does. And all I want to do is cut out those ghosting lines. It seems like there's one just on the inside of here. And if for whatever reason, if you're like, you know what, I really want this crop, well, keep it that way. There is a line very, very faintly running through here. You could use the eraser tool to fix that, but for the sake of not having to do more work than I really need to, I'm just going to pull that crop in, and then I will pull this left side in as well. And I need to rotate this. So I'm going to rotate it to where it sits quite decently, which I think that this is the way that I would probably want it to look. And I enjoy the ghosted trees in the background. Looks like the sun is just like hitting those ones, but there's shadow over here. Um, Everything seems to be making pretty decent sense in the overall image. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark because I've included just the right amount of information. It takes ON1 a second to adjust and make those crops, but eventually you will get a updated preview with all the crops. And at this point, once you get your updated preview like so, you have completed your effect, and now it's time to do all the styling. All right. So this is where you can activate Brilliance AI if you so choose, because this is like a normal image at this point. And you can add in or do whatever you absolutely want to do. I think Brilliance AI overcooks this image. So we're going to pull down on the amount quite a bit here because we don't need that much of whatever was going on here in Brilliance AI. I haven't recalibrated this to the way that I personally like it to be since I reinstalled ON1. In fact, I don't even know if I like the local adjustments that it's making, although what it did to the sky isn't too bad. But yeah, I'll leave the local adjustments as is. I don't really care for them, but just know that that is something you may want to take a look at. And then when it comes to tone and color, maybe I want to throw a little bit of vibrancy into the overall look because this is an impressionistic type of look. So it's okay to do something a little bit more vibrant and, colorful. At least I think, personal preference. The last thing that I'll do to this particular image, because I could sit here and edit this in so many different ways, is I'm going to add a dynamic contrast to the entire image. However, I'm going to mask it in only to the tree because I don't need it in the sky. And I don't know if I really need it on the grass. So I'm going to click on my properties, come over to my masking. We're going to invert this mask. And I'm going to push my opacity back up to 100%. And I'm going to go to paint make my brush size a little bit larger, and I'm going to paint this in on the tree, like I said. And you could choose stylistically how you want to paint this in. Doesn't really matter, uh, as long as you like it. And I'm also going to come down the base of the tree, and I may even hit these trees over here. And this just helps with adding in a little bit of structure to the overall image, and leaves the grass untouched. And then maybe I'll even throw a little bit onto this bench just to help that kind of stand out just a little bit more. So this is without dynamic contrast, and this is with it. Actually, I think yep, I did miss a little bit in here. Not that it would have really been noticeable, but for the sake of making sure that I have that painted, I think that that does well. So if I turn this off, you can see the tree doesn't quite pop. Turn it on, it kind of pops a little bit more. Maybe I should paint it out into these lesser opaque branches, these more transparent branches. And, that just helps with the definition of the tree. So I think that that does the overall effect. And, you could also add a glow to this. Like I said, you could stylize this in so many ways. You could add a glow to the final look like that, and that really can take it to the next level. There's so many different things that you can do with this particular effect, but hopefully you found some value in it. If you did, smash the like button. If you want to know more about editing techniques of what you can do in On1, send me an email and say, hey, can you do this in On1? I can't promise that I'll figure it out, but I'll absolutely try. And if we can, then I'll make a video just like this. Thank you, Guillotine, for sharing your photos and asking about this particular editing style. I hope this meets the intent. And until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.